would have been even possible without the cloud. There's no physical space. You couldn't load in enough servers. You couldn't have the ability that now we again take for granted. I mean, a lot of technology is being knocked, but I mean, technology is the same as steel. It's no different than steel. It's all a question of how it's applied. It's fundamentally neutral, although I have to say that what's not neutral is the way we have been sort of, instead of a tool for connection, sort of the promise of everybody being connected, it's really become a tool for division. And that would probably not have been possible without the ability to speak to anyone in the world, essentially without consequences, and to do it to a huge extent anonymously, which is a whole nother set of problems.
So technology has become second nature. We used to lament our kids having screen time and the amount of time that they were looking at screens, as addicted as they are to the multiple screens in our lives. How do you understand the current state of technology in our lives? And where do you see things going?
Well, I may have missed a little bit of that, but let me give you a couple of examples, and I think that this will resonate with everyone's personal experience. First of all, I think we're more comfortable putting our child into an Uber than we are letting somebody borrow our phone. Okay. We have a connection to these devices that is so intense and so personal that it's frightening. It's literally frightening. I mean, we understand, the issue with technology that's so interesting is that it's always put into use before it's completely understood, before we really understand the implications. So, one example is just how connected we are to our phones. I sent to Amy a chart, and I think, Amy, if you want to bring it up, I mean, I think that everybody on the phone or on this the call understands Maslow's triangle. But what I would tell you is that in the practical application of our lives today, this issue of the need to be connected, the need to be have access, this is something that is new. This is something that literally has taken on an importance in our lives that we're just beginning to understand. So what I would say is that we're somewhat afraid of technology because we're so dependent on it, and we understand that we can only control it to a certain extent, and we have this love-hate situation and relationship. I'm done with that, Amy, if you want to get it off, where we move from distrusting some of this to depending on it, and from feeling that it's an obligation to something that's really a desire. I mean, I feel like I'm more in touch with my kids and my grandkids through FaceTime, as you mentioned, and some of these other tools than I have been or would have been, certainly in my lifetime. It's become a connection tool that's very important. But it's also created a situation where it brings with it sort of this peculiar thing. We expect more and more from technology, and in a sense, less and less from each other. And so that's really, to me, the opportunity for community-based organizations, for synagogues, to figure out how are we going to reconnect people in terms of their personal experience. And technology is going to have to be part of that.
I don't think there's no question that we're not going back. We're not going to snap back to January of 2020. I've been amazed by how quickly we have adapted. But I think the real question is, is Zoom a vehicle for the creation of community, or is it, does it serve kind of a function? Yeah, I mean, I know we're stuck with it. I know it, but in examining it, there was a piece in the New York Times not long ago, why Zoom is terrible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And, I think, Amy, you could put that up, the quotation from it, because I think it's worth pausing and just reflecting on how true is this really? Let's go back up just a little down from there. Nope. Let's leave before we
There it is.
home. This was a study that was done not all long ago. Wait, don't go down so quickly, Amy. Just go back up a little bit so we can look at this chart while it's in front of us. Amy, you want to just bring it back up? I mean, this was done by this was a study. Thanks. This was a study that was done about people working at home, right? So people are really working at home, and when they put this chart together, notice that your biggest struggle with working remotely is collaboration and communication, but right next to it is loneliness, right? Here we are looking at screens, here we are talking to each other, but there is this loneliness of not being in the physical proximity of other people, right? It's right there. And so now if you kind of scroll down a little bit more to this New York Times article, it says, but there are reasons, and Howard, I really would like you to comment on this, but there are reasons to be wary of technology beyond the widely reported security and privacy concerns. Psychologists, computer scientists, and neuroscientists say the distortions and delays inherent in video communication can end up making you feel isolated, anxious, and disconnected, or more than you were already. You might be better off just talking on the phone. The problem is the way video images are digitally encoded and decoded, altered and adjusted, patched and synthesized, introduces all kinds of artifacts, blocking, freezing, blurring, jerkiness, and out of sync audio. These disruptions, some below our conscious awareness, confound perception, scramble subtle social cues. Our brains strain to fill in the gaps and make sense of the disorder, which makes us feel vaguely disturbed, uneasy, and tired without quite knowing. Howard, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I just experienced most of those syndromes. I think you're back. I think you're back now. I think you're back now. I think that we have a lot of issues with the technology. I mean, there's no question that it's bumpy. I mean, I think there's been a lot of psychology studies over the years that kids don't learn from video on TV. You know, we've parked a whole generation of kids in front of the TV set for Sesame Street and otherwise, and thought that they were going to learn. And it turns out that it's a physiological thing, that we don't have the same connection to somebody who is sitting right in front of us that we do to somebody who is on a video in front of us. And this is part of the whole process, part of the whole issue with it. But look, I think that, you know, you have to start with the idea that we had some presumed goals for communication, and we had an intent with respect to that. And then we have to look at what the effect has been. And the effect, in many respects, has been much different. But I'm not sure that if that survey were taken again, and it was a 2020 survey, but I mean, if it were taken again, I'm not sure that some of those components wouldn't change now that people are getting accustomed to. You know, we have some friends who at 4 o'clock each afternoon have a drink with their group of friends on Zoom, and they've replicated a fairly interesting social experience, and it's become meaningful to them. It's a way of keeping in touch with a group of their friends. So I don't know. I think that we're going to, when we finally get released from not being able to be in each other's presence, I think that there's going to be a real premium, as I said before, on what are we going to want to come back to, and what are we going to look to. And, you know, the synagogue is a perfect example. What are we going to look to the synagogue for in terms of our own needs and what's going to be important to us after all of this separation, after this sort of desire to, you know, touch and reconnect with people. And I think we're gonna discover that it has to do with parallel experiences, which you really, that might include tradition, it might include rituals, it might include a shared community of thought, certainly proximity, certainly shared experiences. We've been talking about the high holidays and how we're going to replicate, that experience. And it's going to be challenging. It's going to be challenging for everybody because of how important it is, during that period of time every year to reconnect with people that you might literally see once or twice a year. And it's a very meaningful connection. And so the technology, we thought that it was going to be isolating. It's turned out not really to be isolating, but it hasn't borne the whole freight of really connecting us in a meaningful way to people as well. I think though the doctors are gonna tell you that they're never going back. That they're 7 out of 10 people that have a physical visit to the doctor have really no reason to do that. And I think that that's going to be a huge change. And when that happens, we'll see what the implications are for sort of bedside manner and all the idea of what that reassuring visit to the doctor, used to mean, and whether it can be replaced or whether it's not that important.
I'm doing a funeral tomorrow. Some of you may been around for a long period of time, but the show might remember a guy by the name of Bob Less, who was just a wonderful, wonderful man who was very devoted to the shul and has been living in Minneapolis with his, so he could be close to his son the last few years. So the funeral tomorrow is going to be in the chapel, because now that the state has opened up, we're going to do it in the chapel at Chicago Jewish Funerals. And I just got like a list of rules for the funeral tomorrow. The 20%, they're allowing 20% of capacity. There's social distancing. Everyone has to wear gloves and masks throughout. And all of the speakers have to wear gloves and masks, even when they are giving the eulogy. So that experience, right, is going to be so strange. It's strange enough to go to the graveside and know that we're Zooming, right? But in some ways, the Shiva, a Zoom Shiva can be far more engaging, far more comforting than the funeral itself when you're wearing all of this, all of these blocks to real community.
Yeah.
And this has been really the challenge. And I'm really concerned about the creation of an online universe. And I think Amy has done a brilliant job in putting opportunities together. But at the end of the day, people want to be able to share their story. They want to connect on a deep and meaningful level. And as we prepare for the high holidays, I believe that much of our work, aside from how we're going to manage the services technologically, most of our work is going to be in how do we ramp up for the holidays? How many touches can we get in there? How can we connect with people in a very profound way? I would suggest to you that one of the remarkable aspects of COVID-19 is that it exposes things. It's exposed, inequities in our society. It's exposed tribalism. It's exposed a whole variety of issues with our medical care. It's also exposed some really wonderful aspects of human nature and the willingness of people to do remarkable things. But it has also really cast a very bright light on institutions like universities, as you said before, to kind of begin to rethink what they're about. And synagogues need to really think about the business of community. How do we create community? And that is our business. It's not simply running services. It's about the connecting the moments that take place in services. And I'm wondering, how does technology, how do you see, and where do you see technology going in a way that's going to enhance that?
Well, first I would say that, notwithstanding your yeoman efforts, that the community is too heavy to be supported by any single, person or any small group. It's got to be a community, and it's important that technology will permit us to be connected to people in their homes, because I think that people, especially of a certain age, are going to be reluctant for quite a period of time to sort of rejoin the groups and the gatherings that were a big part of their everyday existence before. So, I mean, I'm hoping that technology will permit you to do wellness checks, with people at home. I mean, that we'll have to figure out how to make, the whole congregation comfortable using their phone or using their computer at home, whatever they have. And outreach is going to be important. I mean, I think communication, trust, collective responsibility, caring, sort of a pride. These are all the components of what people are going to be increasingly looking for. I mean, technology is very sterile, and you miss the human connection. So we're going to have to try to figure out. And I don't honestly know whether we're going to be told, because they certainly, haven't made any suggestion that being outdoors is a materially safer environment. But I mean, maybe a lot of what has to happen in the first instance is to try and figure out how we can still have gatherings, but we can have some kind of social distancing to sort of replicate the experience. I think that the thought that we're not going to have a vaccine until late in 2021, and the thought that we have a very likely prospect around October, November of a second wave of the virus is going to be very, very difficult. And then you have the misusers of technology, and that's really what is so discouraging, because you can't sort of protect yourself from that. And yet I don't know what we're going to tell kids. I don't know what we're going to tell people who are exposed to this astonishing volume of information.
Wait 1 second, I have to turn this off. I changed. I was having internet issues, so I just changed over. So forgive me for that.
Okay, you're back.
I'm back. So continue what we're saying. Sorry.
No, I was just saying that I think the first order of business is that we thought the technology in many respects was going to bring us closer together, and within a limited group, maybe that's the case. I mean, I think your Friday morning classes are a perfect example. I mean, I honestly think that a huge part of that experience is everybody checking in with each other before the class even starts. Not that the class isn't of value, but the community aspect of that is something that you couldn't do before. You couldn't check in with 20 people that you had this experience with in a way that you now can. And so I think we're going to have to use it as a tool, and that a lot of procedures are going to have to change. I was just thinking, I mentioned the phone and how we're, more likely to part with our children than our phones. But the other thing is, and this is another thing to just ask yourself, whether in your own experience when you were last in your office, whether anybody today could pick up a book or a magazine or a newspaper and sit in their office with their door open and with the windows and looking into their office and sit there and just read. And
Right.
I think the answer is no one can do that. I think that no one can do that, that we're so sort of wrapped up in the need to demonstrate that we're being productive that the fact that we're reading something which could be infinitely productive and ridiculously valuable, we're just uncomfortable doing that. We're uncomfortable taking that time. Now, if you were sitting in front of the screen and playing a crossword puzzle or a word game or whatever, and people walk by all day long, you wouldn't have the slightest angst about your activities. And it's a very peculiar situation. It's another one of these things about the way we relate to technology in our lives, and how we just assume that because we're sitting in front of a keyboard looking at a screen that we're being productive. So I think that the synagogue, I think that all organizations, and this goes back to where we started, I think organizations are going to have to demonstrate a new set of value propositions in this new connected world, and that those are going to be different value propositions for different groups. I think it's going to be very challenging for younger, people, and how to connect to them. And I think to convince somebody in their 20s to make the kind of lifelong commitment to the synagogue and to support the synagogue is, it's going to be very challenging.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but we are clearly in a transitional moment. I'm thinking, I'm looking at Chazan Mizrahi. He's right below me on the screen, and I'm thinking about, how do we manage a service without a choir, right? Or can we pipe the choir in? It's a very different. If you want to comment, Alberto, you can more than welcome to be part of the conversation. But it is a real challenge. How do we hear the sounding of the shofar when there are health issues with that at this point in time? That the shofar is sort of a supercharged way of spreading germs. So are we going to all kind of go outside in shifts during the holidays? So it all. Nothing is exactly the way that it was, and I think we're sort of off balance. And so on the one hand, the role of the synagogue becomes much more evident as a place to gather, a place to be home. People watch the Shabbat morning service, and what I hear most of is, I thought you were just talking to me. It just felt so good to be in the room, to kind of connect, and we couldn't have done that without the virtual possibilities. But you're right, the synagogue is going to have to think very carefully about what does community need, how do we connect in profound and meaningful ways, how do we connect people with each other in this community, both in the building, without the building. Barry Ballack noted before, well, why do we have to go back? Right, it's working pretty well. So we're going to be doing both. But are we also, shouldn't we also be cognizant of what's being lost along the way? Alberto, do you want to join in?
There's a lot to say. To say it slow, to say it quickly. I sent a list of what pieces I feel, and over the last 30 years have felt, that people who come to the synagogue on high holidays, if they don't hear them, they haven't been to shul. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. I've got to hear this. Got to hear the Unatana Torah if I have to hear, certain things. So one of the things we do is, especially if we're going to end up doing things on Zoom, is to keep it quick and to keep it short, but to give the people stuff that feeds their soul and that feeds their brains and that feeds their memories. And I've been at it for a long time. Rabbi, you've been at it for a few years yourself. And I think we know what those things are. And there are electronic ways to put together a choir. It's not going to be 30 voices or 20 voices. It's going to be 12. It's going to be 14. Each one singing their part at home, watching a conductor who's already taped himself so that they all stay in the same beat, possibly having a background that they hear in their ears so that they get the harmonies. And you can put that together. Nothing easy, I can tell you, nothing easy. But I think that's the only way I can see people being satisfied the same way they may have been were they in the synagogue. Of course, the social things that Howard brought out cannot be done on Zoom, but we're going to have to give in for a while.
There's no question. I mean, I think we're giving in it's not giving in, it's about how do we shape it in a way that speaks to us in an authentic way. I do have to I was reminded when you were talking up there, I told a joke about a rabbi who finished his high holiday sermon, and a man came up to him from in the shul and said, "Rabbi, I really loved your sermon. You know, I work for the McNeil-Lehrer Report." This is a pretty dated joke, but people on this call will remember that news show. He said, I work for it. And I was so moved. I would love to put that sermon on, but gosh, we only have about 8 minutes. And the sermon was about 50 minutes. So the rabbi said, well, I could condense it to 8 minutes. I could do that. And the man looked at him and said, well, if you could do it for that, why couldn't you do it today? I mean, one of the, the reality is that when we are, Alberto and I talk about the Shabbos morning service, and when we talk about high holidays, the reality is the vast majority of the congregation will be watching the service from their home.
Yes.
Right? So how long will people be able to watch, right? And so we kind of think about, how long will somebody look at a screen? It's one thing to be in a room where you can look around, where you can read, where you can do lots of things, but looking at a screen, especially, it won't be a Zoom, it'll be a stream service. So the only people you're really going to be seeing are the people who are leading the service and maybe the Torah readers and all the rest. It's a very different experience, and so it really has to be streamlined.
I don't want to take Howard's time, nor yours, and I'm only going to say one more thing, which is when I sent the list of things that I feel must be done because people want it, what does that mean for the rest of the service? We didn't discuss that, but I can tell you that I have my answer to it, and we can discuss it all, until whatever comes home. My answer is that I can daven really quick, and I can get through pieces that will sound and mean what the words mean, but without a choral background, without me sort of taking a break, which I do actually when the choir sings sometimes. But it's going to be a different service, but it won't feel that different because people don't pay attention to the stuff in between too much. So if they can sit back and just get a quick davening, we can also skip certain prayers. I mean, there are things that we can do, but that's why I think the choir is important, because people really want to hear it, but only for certain pieces that just, if you don't do them, they feel, gosh, I really miss that Unasana Tokef, or I really miss, even when I do Hineni, I can tell you I'm going to do it without choir, because then I can move quicker. I can say, and I mean the words anyway that I'm going to say. I'm asking God for His help during a Hineni. And
I just want to, I just want to take note of the fact that I'm making comments in between. So when you say no one's paying attention, I just want to, take note of that. But
well, can I just say a couple of things? First of all, Alberto, we had talked. I was speaking with Michael about the very thing you alluded to, which is that the choir could be constructed, the various songs that the choir, the really important songs, could be, frankly, pre-recorded, and you would have the ability to, insert those at the appropriate time into the service. That's one thing. The other thing that I was thinking about today, and again, this goes to this issue of what's realistic to expect. I wonder if we should start to investigate whether there's a cable channel or there's a way that we could at least get the service onto the big screen that's in people's houses. Because the prospect of 4 or 5 people sitting around a laptop it's a complete non-starter. And so most people don't have a giant monitor associated with their computer that they can access in a group setting, but they certainly have a large screen TV. And so the issue is whether or not there's a public access station or there's some way that we could do the streaming and teach people or encourage people to put it on a big screen. Because otherwise, I don't think people are going to be able to connect to it really at all. So that's, but the musical thing, I think, my daughter is an opera singer and has been putting on these concerts, and they figured out how to have 4 and 5 voices simultaneously. They've sort of figured out how to override the fact that Zoom looks for a single speaker. And so it's possible. It's just a question of, whether that takes place in one place or in a variety of locations.
And I'll tell you that there's going to be competition. There are going to be synagogues in New York that want to show their stuff. They have a lot of money. They've been doing it. They're young, and they use instruments. And they're going to put it on television. And there's a Jewish television station, and it'll be broadcasting throughout the country. So that is stuff. But I think when you say this is the Anshe Emet Synagogue high holidays, this is what you go to every year. And I think there are a lot of people looking for exactly what we give. So,
well, I think,
but I don't know how you're going to get on TV. I mean, that's your thing. And
I think one of the other interesting things is, and this is, I know Art is on. I mean, I think that we're going to have to start communicating right now with respect to the high holidays.
Oh, yes.
That it's going to be a different experience, but that the money that you pay for your seats in the sanctuary or wherever you sit is not about the seat. It's about supporting the institution. And this message has to get in and has to be really solid, because otherwise I'm afraid that a whole bunch of people will do the same thing that's going to happen to all these colleges, which is they're going to say, and by the way, starting with pre-K, at the day school, if I can't get my kid out of the house, I'm not going to sit him in front of the computer for 3 hours at home and call that worth $25,000 or $30,000, whatever tuition is. We have to translate that into an understanding that you're going to be buying your tickets, at least this year, for whatever the experience is, but mostly to support the synagogue, and that the service is important and being there is important, but what's really important is the continuity of supporting all the year-round activities of the synagogue.
Agreed. It's just that when you get to holidays, there's a huge ball of fire there that needs to be.
Yeah, I think it's a big moment. I do want to acknowledge, though, that that people have really responded overwhelmingly positively to our membership. Just as we just opened it up recently, and for this coming year, and it's been really positive. I think that the whole business plan of how a synagogue functions, that's going to have to be reviewed. And Howard, you've been writing about kind of how organizations like a symphony or other cultural entities are thinking about these things. I think synagogues are also going to have to go through a whole revision as to how we think about our business plan as we go forward. I mean, that's a very real thing.
Yeah. I think that every organization, every theater company, everybody that looks and bases their economics on an annual support and then uses that to fund programming throughout the year is going to have to really tighten their belt until they see whether that's going to materialize this year in the same fashion.
But the building is no longer the key to community. I think that's, in the same way that people are going to be working from home and office spaces are going to be shrinking, our use of the building will go through a significant revision as we go forward. It'll bounce back to a certain extent, but people are comfortable being at home. People have gotten used to, waking up. If they want to go to Minyan, they can go to Minyan. They don't have to kind of shove over to the shul. There will be those who will, and there will be those who won't. I'm looking around now. I mean, and I want to see if anyone has questions that they want to ask as we continue on. Don Kagan, you're here. You think about these things quite a bit. Give us some of your thoughts. Unmute yourself then.
Great. Well, I'm having these conversations daily with synagogues across the city and suburbs. You know, it's the personal banter between you and Chazan that create the real moments. If we just put on a TV show, perfectly crafted, which I know everyone wants a beautiful, meaningful production, then I don't think the hearts are going to be touched as well as they do. So if we're trying to recreate community, we're trying to re-engage as if we were still finding a way to engage as if we were still in the same, walls and ceiling. It's going to be those personal moments. It's going to be the intimate prayer of Hineni, not necessarily the grand choral one as Alberto just described. And it's going to be the banter in between. And it's going to be the little stories, Michael, that you tell in between parts of the service. So of course we can't do a 6-hour, 8:30 to 2:30, Rosh Hashanah day one service that people are going to sit in front of. But I think it's going to be an interesting challenge to craft just the right balance between, okay, let's keep this thing moving and allowing for your humanity to inspire us.
Yeah. Look, people are also, I'm watching the comments go through, and it's your shofar sounding as well that makes a difference to people. People look forward to that as much as anything. It's a great gift to us, and how we're going to do that this year is going to be, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge, but I definitely think we're up to it. But anybody else want to talk about technology? Anybody want to talk about their experience of technology and how they, how it has connected them to the synagogue and how they feel about that?
Ben Kleinman had a comment.
Go ahead, Ben.
Hey all, thanks for putting this together. This is fantastic discussion. I'm curious for those folks in the Anshe Emet community who may not be so interested in using technology on Shabbat or on a high holiday. How do you engage with that crowd?
Well, that's a great question.
We actually talked about whether or not we would record a whole service in order for it to be asynchronously watched by somebody who didn't want to, do it because of being observant. It's a real challenge, but I mean, it's certainly something that's worth doing. Depending
On how the, where we stand with COVID-19, we're going to, if we can create different services in the building, that's what we're going to do. I should also mention that the chapel service is also going to be live streamed because people want to have that opportunity as well. So if you want to be in a live stream service, that's great. If you don't, we're going to create other opportunities for you either in the building, and we're looking at possibilities of going outside and how we can possibly do that. Needless to say, but we are, spending a lot of time thinking it through. But this year, I can say that we're going to be, you will have multiple opportunities to engage. We're going to live stream our high holiday service, and there'll be times, right? Instead of saying 9:30, we're going to say half hour late, 45 minutes late. There'll be times for where you can hear the sermon, the shofar sounding, and all the rest. And we're going to do our very best to stick to that so that people can kind of follow the service. It won't be the full Anshe Emet effect service. For that, you can watch a pre-recorded service that we're going to be putting together with a full choir and and with opportunities to not only hear my sermon, but other rabbi sermons as well. so that there's a whole universe of opportunities. There'll also be a live stream from the community hall. There'll also be a live stream from the chapel, and the community hall service is going to look different, very different, and have a different feel than the sanctuary service. So we're putting together an entire package of opportunities, and I didn't mention family services, children's services, and all the rest. Some of them will be pre-recorded. But
Michael,
yeah,
Michael, can I ask? I just wanted to ask Don a question based on his ongoing conversations, because the issue with the live service is going to be live streaming is going to be how to make that visually interesting, which to me translates into multiple cameras and some kind of switching. And Don, are you getting pushback from all the different synagogues about none of that can go on? Or are people saying that under these circumstances, we have to make some adjustments in terms of what's possible within the synagogue itself?
Sure. Well, even within the conservative synagogues, we have everything from the amount of daily interaction that our Anshe Emet community has provided us to not even a single stream spot, one camera Zoom. They're not doing anything. So I'm running the gamut, and I'm not talking about moving into modern Orthodox or anything. I'm just saying within the conservative. So there's going to be, I think Michael just laid out a whole menu of options that the community is going to have. Keeping the live stream visually engaging and not two talking heads on the bima is certainly a challenge. It's easy to do the pre-produced, well, not easy, we're going to be putting on TV shows, but the pre-produced services can have different elements. They can have the wonderful choir. We can show the stained glass windows. We can show artwork, scenes of Israel. I mean, it can be just a wonderful emotional experience. The Chazan and the Rabbi standing on the bima giving us their full heart, but visually there's not going to be a lot happening. I see using remote cameras. They don't have as good optics as real human operated cameras. Just the lenses aren't as good, but they will allow you to have zooming and panning and motion in the look of the service, and then with someone actually switching camera 1, camera 2, camera 3. So we have a look. But imagine sitting in the sanctuary. I mean, I'm looking at the different pages of the prayer book. I'm looking at the beautiful stained glass. I mean, our eyes have lots to take in, and when we look at this little screen, our eyes have so little to engage us. So even with the remote controlled zoom and panning and everything, there's not that much there. I'm also wondering, and I'm sure this can be addressed, how the prayer book is going to be, how that would work out on a high holy day.
I missed that. How, what would work out?
Is the congregation going to have prayer books?
Well, that's the question.
I mean, I have lots of solutions. I have technology solutions, but that's not for now. But I think it's really about engagement. It's about recreating in a new way the community experience. So people read on the sidebar. They look at they're not always just listening. And so what are we all going to offer them? And if they are going to listen, how do they know that how are we going to flip the page to the next page of the Torah service? I'm thinking a lot about these things because I've been a member of the synagogue for 38 years. Becky has been in the synagogue, went to day school. So I'm closely tied to the synagogue, but I have all this technological background too. And how can we still make this Anshe Emet high holidays?
Just to that point, this is the whole issue with menus in restaurants. I mean, the truth is that, in the course of a typical service, probably 5 or 6 people different people may handle the exact same book. And I don't know what we're going to do Michael, with respect to
Well,
sterilization and all those kinds of things.
right. I mean, I don't know. I know that many of you come on Shabbat morning. I would be interested to know, and you could actually put it on the chat if you wanted to. For those people who daven with us on Shabbos morning, and there's at least 200 people every Shabbos morning davening with us, how many of you use the Siddur that's online? There's the Siddur that the Rabbinical Assembly has made a Siddur available. How many people take advantage of that? How many people use their own Siddur? I wonder how many people don't use a Siddur. So, at all, they just listen. I mean, it's an interesting issue. And, I don't know so Don, you raised some questions that are very much alive and things we've been thinking about. But I think part of it is going to have to be that we're going to have to ask people. If they want to borrow Machzorim, then we're going to have to also figure out how we're going to take care of them when they get back and make sure that they can be reused and all the rest. But I'm seeing people who are noting right now that they use the Siddur online. So it's just these are all really important questions to ask.
I mean, there are simple solutions to have each page of text prepared as graphics, and it becomes part of the stream, and the pages are flipped, and so it's a split screen. I mean, there's going to be ways to do this if you want people not to have to go from a PDF on a separate device. That's maybe that's beyond the scope, and we have Howard here to ask, I think, more important questions.
Yes. Right, and how do we show the rabbi and the cantor? But it is going to be a real process as to how we make this. Not only do write the sermon and make comments and all of the cantorial art that goes into it, but it's also how do we keep people focused on the experience of the service is going to be a real question mark. I will also say that it opens up real possibilities for different types of study opportunities. The Yom Kippur study session can be very different. First of all, it could be pre-recorded with someone in Israel. We could have all kinds of different things that we would normally not have had opportunities to do. So I look at technology, as a constant opportunity to enhance what we do, but we have to be thoughtful about it. Other questions, comments, anybody? Go ahead, Stanley.
My big issue with
Stanley, I can't hear you.
Need your volume up.
Am I better now?
Yeah.
Okay. My big issue with Shabbat and the holidays is not being able to see other congregants. And, as was noted, we can go to other congregations, New York or anywhere around the country and see other people. And even as somebody said, it's not but it would be, that to me is a big issue, that not being able to see others who are also part.
Human beings are social animals, right? And as Stanley says, we like seeing other people. We like having the experience. We like hearing other voices in the room, right? And I'm just looking at Cheryl's question here. If social distancing is the main issue, would renting space in the Open Arms Church and Grace and Broadway help? Would people be willing to go there for a live stream? Do we need other venues is a really interesting question. We are looking at every option, but I'm certainly more than happy to put that out there. So in the remaining few minutes, Don Kagan has a question for Howard. Looking a year or more ahead, not just 4 months to the holiday, what do you see ahead for how congregational life will transform?
Well, I think that, we have to make an economic plan to offer a package of value to the next couple of generations of kids coming up, small, young families coming up to support the synagogue, because I think that there's going to be an enormous transition in terms of what the common expectation is and what membership in the synagogue means. I mean, to me, that's the that's the real concern. It's always been a bizarre and strange relationship that we've had with the day school when we talk about, whether they, should be members of the synagogue, whether they need to be members of the synagogue, whether, the day school should, persist in this idea that it's a secular organization, which is insane. So I think that, I look at museum boards that we're involved in. They're trying to figure out what the arts are going to mean just across the board to a generation that has a much more modest attention span, less of an interest in institutions and in supporting institutions for the sake of the institution. We're seeing now every week now an invitation for a virtual gala for some group. And what they don't do is they don't go right out to these people and say, look, you never came to this gala for the rubber chicken and for the asparagus. You came to support the organization. And I think the sooner organizations start to put that out there, the sooner they will find exactly who the core congregation of the future is going to be. And it's going to be very, very challenging.
There's no question. I do believe, and with this I think we're going to close, that from the very beginning, Judaism has been about community and building a Jewish community, celebrating our history and our holidays and our Torah, but it's always within community. And the future is going to be dependent on how we build community and enhance community with technology. That I think that's the challenge of the moment, but I also think that it is the opportunity of the moment.
Can I just say one other thing? Brian put a suggestion in here in the comments about renting the Cubs, big parking lot to have a drive-in service. But, a more interesting question is the Cubs do have that park in front of the park with that giant Jumbotron screen. And that's actually sort of an interesting possibility to think about whether or not something could be done the way they do the concerts at Cubs Park. They have a stage and they have this huge Jumbotron screens. And it could be, weather dependent, but you could have appropriate social distancing and actually have a pretty substantial crowd there.
Well, okay. Well, that's something to think about. We have built a committee who are looking at it. People from the entertainment industry, people like Howard who are, in the world of technology, and people like Don Kagan who really have a real understanding. Anshe Emet is a remarkable place, and what makes it remarkable is its community and how many talented people are involved. I know that's been the great privilege for Alberto and I, and just to be able to call on you, Howard, and for you to give us your time to share some of your insight into where we are and where we're going and how to think about it. That's a great privilege for all of us. So thank you so much for making the time, everybody. Next week.
Of course. Thank you, Rabbi.
Can I put in a plug for Sunday, or is it Sunday? Yeah, Sunday the 14th, we're having David Broza mini concert that'll be webcast from David's home. And I hope everybody will check that out at 7 p.m. on Sunday the 14th.
Great. That's one program. Next, and also it's a great program, and we're going to be honoring first responders in that program. It's a very important evening, and thanks to Howard, David is going to take part. The next week, our Conversations of Consequence is going to feature Lonnie Nassiter from the JOF. We're going to be talking about the larger community and how the JOF is responding, and not only to COVID-19, but to the challenges of the Jewish community as it faces economic challenges, and also how the JOF is branching out to go beyond the Jewish community and support other communities in need as well. The following week, we're going to have another Conversation of Consequence, and it's going to be a treat to welcome rabbis who have served this congregation, whether it's Elliot Cosgrove or Charlie Savinor or Daniel Berg or Abe Friedman or David Ackerman. We're going to have a conversation about what's going on in their shuls, catch up a little bit with them, but also look at the future of Jewish life with some young rabbis who have made a difference for us and who are making a difference, really doing remarkable things around the country. Thanks everybody for joining us, and Howard, thank you.
Sure.
It's a great
Thank you
privilege.
very much. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Robert.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Howard, really well done.
Thank you. Bye all.
Bye-bye, Howard. Thank you.
Very good. Very good.
Oh, look, there's Ruthie. Hi, Barry. This is my favorite part. It's just watching everybody at the end.
Okay, that's it.
There's Andy.
I heard you got the chat thing, so I can't find
That's funny.
All right, Kinderlach. Sei gesund. See you whenever. Soon, I hope. Okay? Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Amy,
Yes.
it's Arnie. I think what the synagogue should promote is how we attend high holidays. We should dress at home like we're going to services. We should remember the uniqueness of this year.
Yeah.
Tell our children and grandchildren and theirs that we went through a high holiday that was unlike anyone.
Unlike any before, and hopefully never again.
And take from that the uniqueness of it, not to watch something from the Met in New York with congregation. We don't, knowing the familiarity of the rabbi and the cantor and you and other folks around is what makes Anshe Emet what it is. And if we've been involved in a couple of graduations already, and the schools are doing a great job graduating their kids.
Yeah.
Another one is going to have next week, where they're going to drive through Lane Tech. Each one get their diploma, So there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. I think if everyone pitches in and realizes they're a part of something historic and beautiful, it'll flow.
It's a really nice way of framing it. And I know that we are definitely working on our messaging a lot. There's so many of us on this conversation all the time. Believe me, we're talking about this every day. And, I appreciate your insight.
You have a real uphill challenge. And it's something to try to achieve. So we respect you for doing it. Anything you need, let us know.
Well, thank you so much, guys. We appreciate it.
Bye all.
Bye-bye. Okay. Go downstairs and make some
Good
Hi, Liz Berkey. Where are you? In your kitchen?
I'm in my kitchen.
So I'm about to go.
Just cooking and listening.
I'm going to start making challah with my niece downstairs in a few minutes.
Nice. How are things up there?
Good. They're good. It's nice to be up here. The weather's supposed to turn really not so nice, but that's okay.
You're together. It's nature. Nice.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be with my sister. It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. It's a good thing, Liz. All right. You and I need to talk about Melton for next year, huh?
You know what? I'm going to go with it. I reached out to a rabbi that he mentioned, Bauman, I forgot the name, and he's definitely interested in collaborating. So I'm going to talk with him next week. So I'm just going to, tomorrow when I'm before services at Shul, I'll print up the contract and sign it, and we'll go. And I'll just have to have faith.
I'll be right behind you.
All right. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to sign off. Good night, everybody.
Night.